Hey everyone, Brendan Snyder here. How are you? Thanks so much for joining me, and welcome to an album ranking for none other than the metal gods, Judas Priest. So the band formed 55 years ago in 1969, and this year, 2024, it is their 50th anniversary since releasing their debut album, Rolla, in 1974. In all, the band has released 19 studio albums, including their newest album, Invincible Shield, and I thought it would make this time a perfect time to do an album ranking covering all 19 studio albums. So that's what we'll do here. I'll break it down, cover that, do the full countdown in just a bit. But before we get started, if you're new to my channel and you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please do. Also leave a comment, hit like, all those things do help support my channel. I'd greatly appreciate it. And if you turn on notifications, you'll stay up to date on everything going on in the world of music, just like this with an album ranking for Judas Priest. All right, so as I said, 19 studio albums here to cover. We'll dive right into it. First one up, Nostradamus, 2008, coming in at number 19. So 16 studio album when it was released, and it was a double album, a concept album at the time. But instead of it being, really two full albums worth of songs, it had 9 or 10 interlude tracks that were in there. And I just sort of felt cheated in the end of the day, not really getting a double album. The thing is, though, the songs are good that's on here, but for me, it doesn't really sound like Judas Priest. This does not have any of the classic sounds that we know from Judas Priest. So while I still think it's a good album, it still has good songs on it. Even if we strip away all those little interludes and things in it, which is what I've ended up doing most of the time when I listen to it, kind of creating a playlist, it just doesn't resonate for me as much as the others because to me, it doesn't have that classic Judas Priest sound. It was also the last album to feature founding member and guitarist KK Downing. Okay, coming in at number 18, Jugulator from 1997, 13th studio album. First album since Painkiller 7 years earlier. So obviously the band had a lot to live up to with this album. It's also the first one to feature new vocalist Tim Ripper Owens taking over for Rob Halford. And he was definitely up to the task. I mean, Tim Ripper Owens, an absolutely amazing vocalist. I think he brought a breath of fresh air into the band at a time during the 90s when that was a very difficult thing to be doing for metal music. But I did feel that the music, the lyrics, the album art even, just really screamed to me Painkiller 2 on this. I felt it was a little derivative, kind of came off a bit cheesy and comical, not nearly as good as the original Painkiller album was all those years earlier. All right, coming in at number 17, Ram It Down from 1988, their 11th studio album, last to feature drummer Dave Holland. Now, this album here was actually originally intended to be part of a double album that was called Twin Turbos. So it was the album Turbo from 1986 that had been released 2 years earlier. That was going to be a double album, with Turbo itself as the more melodic album with the synthesizers and all of that, and the heavier side of the album being this one, Ram It Down. And so ultimately that didn't happen. They split the album and we got this 2 years later. And while Turbo is much different, and I think that it worked for, some degree of having the change in sound, this one here really sounded like they were trying too hard to match up with their classic stuff, and it just sort of came off derivative, much the same way that I was just talking about Jugulator doing the same sort of thing. When Judas Priest tries to replicate that classic stuff, I think oftentimes it doesn't work for them. When they just do what they want to do, which sometimes is branching out and trying new things, in my opinion, it often works a lot better. Coming in at number 16, Rolla from 1974, their debut studio album, and only album to feature drummer John Hinch. This one here, fully rooted in the 70s. It does feature a much more progressive rock style sound than, of course, what they would be known for later on, the full-on hard rock and heavy metal approach of later albums. Just check out the track Winter, Deep Freeze, Winter Retreat, which is really all one track, even though they list them as 3 separate tracks as something that is that that more progressive element that was going on at the time for the band. Not really having found their footing just yet, but the album opener on here, One for the Road, one of my favorite songs. I love that one. I can put that on and listen to it anytime. All right, coming in at number 15, Sad Wings of Destiny from 1976. This is their second studio album and only album to feature drummer Alan Moore. Still very much rooted in the 70s like the last album, Rolla was. But this one here began to give Judas Priest represent the sound that they would sort of grow into with songs like Victim of Changes, The Ripper, Tyrant, all those songs on here starting to give the band that definition of who they would become. And I also feel like Rob Halford really started to step into his trademark vocal sound much more than the debut album, at least. All right, coming in at number 14, Stained Glass from 1978, fourth studio album. First one to feature drummer Les Binks. The album would move in a little bit of a different direction than they had on previous albums. But unfortunately, the album itself would really be remembered for the controversy that it set apart a number of years later in 1985 when two teens attempted suicide. And this was supposedly after listening to the song Better By You, Better Than Me, which is not even a Judas Priest song. It's actually a cover of a Spooky Tooth song. But the band was sued for having backwards messages in the song that supposedly led to the teens creating a suicide pact, with one of the teens being successful. The trial took place in 1990, and ultimately the band would be found not liable, which was, of course, a very good thing. It would have really changed everything had they been found liable. So, the thing they say, though, is no publicity is bad publicity. As, while the band was in the media for all of this, that's how I actually discovered the band. I've been a lifelong fan ever since, and of course, I'm still here. All right, moving on to number 13, Redeemer of Souls from 2005, their 17th studio album. First to feature new guitarist Richie Faulkner taking over for founding member KK Downing, who retired. The album really showed what the band was capable of and that they could exist without one of their key founding members, and somebody that was as influential in the writing as KK Downing was. He had a hand in so many of their classic songs, but Richie Faulkner stepped in, he proved his worth, and that it was really a fitting choice to have taken over to fill those big shoes of KK Downing. Now, unlike when the band had changed singers with Tim Ripper Owens coming in for Rob Halford, and they closed ranks, and Tim Ripper Owens either didn't write or wasn't allowed to write, don't really know, but they allowed Richie to join in and co-write the songs on the album, and I think that was the right move. Absolutely, again, proving his worth and what he was capable of. Some amazing standout songs on this album: Halls of Valhalla, my personal favorite, March of the Damned, and the song Battle Cry. Okay, coming in at number 12, Firepower from 2018, their 18th studio album, and first since 1988's Ram It Down to be produced by Tom Allom. Now, Ram It Down, as you know, in terms of my placing here, I don't think was that great of an album. Not a bad album, just not a great album. So I'm really glad that Tom Allom returned here to produce such a killer album as Firepower, which incidentally debuted at number 5 on the Billboard 200 album chart, which is their highest entry to date. Now, of course, we don't know where the new album Invincible Shield is going to place, because at the time of filming this, the album only just dropped a couple days earlier, and you don't usually find out its placement till a full week later. Now, band made a conscious effort on this album to revisit some of their past glories, and in this particular case, I think they did a fairly good job at that, with some killer tracks like Firepower, the title track, Never the Heroes, which is a personal favorite of mine, Children of the Sun, which is an absolute stellar track, and the song No Surrender, which is just killer, straight ahead, hard rock that they can do so well sometimes. Coming in at number 11, Killing Machine from 1978, their 5th studio album. Last one to feature drummer Les Binks. The band took more of a commercial approach on this one here, allowed that to really, influence them with what was going on, but at the same time, they were also influencing the burgeoning new wave of British heavy metal scene. So while they didn't, create that, they definitely were influencers of it that a lot of those bands had been listening to. And, the band also adopted their trademark look for this album, the now infamous leather and stud look that, of course, they have done ever since and do so well. But more than the look, the album had amazing songs on it, delivering the goods. Hellbent for Leather, a perfect song if ever there was one, to introduce that look on Evening Star and Take on the World. All right, coming in at number 10, Sin After Sin from 1977, their third studio album. The band used a session drummer for this album, which would be Toto's drummer Simon Phillips, or at least he would go on to Toto, but he played on this album here. This one here was the first one to really sort of present the sound that we would know that would become the Judas Priest trademark sound on it. Amazing songs like Sinner, Dissident Aggressor, and then the song Diamonds and Rust, which is one of the songs that the band is really known for, although it is a cover of the Joan Baez folk song, but they just do it in such an amazing way, and with Rob Halford's amazing, beautiful vocals that he does with it, showing off what he was capable of. It's often considered that song that really shows off what a vocalist can do when they sing it in the same style and way that Judas Priest has always done with this one. And incidentally, the song Diamonds and Rust had been covered in 1975, so this was a new recording of it for this album here, and ultimately becoming the most famous version of the song. All right, coming in at number 9, Invincible Shield 2024, their brand new 19th studio album, first in 6 years. This one here, amazing way to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the band, being 1974 to 2024 in terms of their releasing albums. That debut all the way back in 74, Rolla. This one here is still very new to me. I've only digested it just recently. I have done a full review on it. I'll leave a link in the description below to it. But I really like the varied pace of this album here. Number of different musical styles on it that, for me at least, keeps the album fresh and interesting throughout. Some real amazing standout songs. Gates of Hell, a great straight-ahead hard rock number. Crown of Horns, which is my favorite track on here, a kind of slower mid-pace song. And then Giants in the Sky, which is a fantastic way to end the album, just wrapping everything up with a nice, perfect bow on it for 2024. Okay, coming in at number 8, Angel of Retribution, 2005, their 15th studio album and reunion album with the return of Rob Halford. So he had been absent on the 2 previous albums, Jugulator and Demolition, now returning. The opening track on this Judas Rising just announced not only one killer album, but of course the return of Rob Halford. Just an absolute brutal track that easily could have appeared on Painkiller from 1990. And the rest of the album on here had a number of different styles. It was kind of cool. It was like Judas Priest doing a little bit of all of the different styles from throughout their career, the metal, the hard rock, you name it. It was here. Just a fantastic comeback album with lots and lots of classic sounds on it. Coming in at number 7, Demolition from 2001, 14th studio album. Last to feature Tim Ripper Owens. The album itself really showed the band branching out, trying new styles, new sounds on it, and not really trying to replicate the way that they had on Jugulator, which I've always kind of referred to as Painkiller too. This album, unfortunately, didn't really resonate with music fans. I thought that it would. I had liked Jugulator. I liked Tim Ripper Owens, but it didn't really resonate with me. As I said, it sort of felt derivative. When this album came out, I thought, here's Judas Priest, here's that forward momentum that they've always shown and done with albums, not just sort of resting on their laurels. But unfortunately, like I said, it didn't really solidify with fans. But for me, at least, it solidified my love with Tim Ripper Owens. I think he's a phenomenal vocalist. Sometimes I even like him better than Rob Halford. Luckily, I don't have to choose between the two guys, as they are both amazing vocalists. Standout songs on here that I really like: One on One, Hell Is My Home, which is a favorite of mine, In Between, and the killer track Feed on Me. Coming in at number 6, Point of Entry from 1981, 7th studio album, featuring even more radio-friendly songs and direction than the album British Steel. The name of this album, though, also really says it all, because the band felt that it was a point of entry for people who had not heard Judas Priest. So if you were new to the band, new to their catalog, this was the album that could get you into the band. And, at the time and place of 1981, I can understand why they were making that shift. And even so, when they do the more straight ahead, radio-friendly styles, that stuff can come across just as amazing as their full-on metal assault that they'll do. It's a great album. Although I think if it had had a few more of the heavier style songs on it, this one here probably could have moved up a few notches in terms of the ranking, making it a more classic album. Still some amazing tracks on here, like Heading Out to the Highway, which is a personal favorite, Desert Plains, and Hot Rockin'. Coming in at number 5, Turbo from 1986, 10th studio album. Notable for the change in a more commercial direction, adding the synthesizers for the first time. And thing is, they still had a huge hit with the song Turbo Lover on here, and yet it divided fans across the board because of that 80s production value on here. This is one of those albums that has always divided fans. You'll even hear people refer to that one-off album that's very different by a band as being that band's Turbo album. And this is where that reference will come from, because when Judas Priest did it, it was so night and day different. And I sort of came at it after the fact. I came into the band in 1990 with Painkiller. But this album here, despite how different it is from other Judas Priest sounding albums, I've always really liked this album. And as noted earlier, it was meant to be a double album, having this one, the more radio-friendly sounds, paired with Ram It Down as the second part to the album, released together, although they were split ultimately, and Ram It Down was released separately in 1988. I wonder, though, if the album had come out as a double album, whether we would be talking about it in a different light. Maybe people wouldn't be so divided on the album, or maybe it would divide people even more. Who knows? And we'd be talking about that they should have separated the albums. If it had come out as a double album, we really would have another album to be discussing here, and I kind of wish for that. But all in all, still a great album. Favorite song on it, Out in the Cold. Okay, coming in at number 4, Defenders of the Faith, 1984, 9th studio album from the band, featuring some of the amazing material and stuff that, Screaming for Vengeance had done. But, ultimately this album here would cause controversy in the same way that Stained Class did with the song Eat Me Alive, because it was added to what was called the Filthy 15 at the time. It was a list by the PMRC, Parents Music Resource Center, that was headed up by then Senator's wife and future Vice President wife, Tipper Gore. So she being married to Vice President Gore. And ultimately, though, like I said, no publicity is bad publicity. It only helped fuel the sales of this. The album itself would be certified for 1 million sales, platinum in the US. Lots of killer songs on this album. I've always loved this one. Free Will Burning, Jawbreaker, The Sentinel, Love Bites, and again, a personal favorite of mine, Some Heads Are Gonna Roll. All right, we're down to the top 3 here, and coming in at number 3, British Steel, 1980, their 6th studio album. First to feature drummer Dave Holland. The album's been described by some as essentially a thrash album. I don't know if I'd go that far, but artists like Max Cavalera of Sepultura has cited it as such and talks about it often, and refers to having had discussions with members of Metallica about the same thing. It's a great album, definitely broke new ground for the band, and it's just got some killer standout tracks on it, like Breaking the Law, Rapid Fire, Metal Gods, and Living After Midnight. Just a true classic from the heavy metal glory days. Coming in at number 2, Screaming for Vengeance, 1982, 8th studio album, definitely a classic, arguably their best album. From album opener, The Hellion Electric Eye, to the killer song Bloodstone that's on here, and the album anthem, You've Got Another Thing Coming. It just steals the show for the album as a whole, making this a notch above the rest. It's one of those albums, in my opinion, that not only captures a time, but actually still remains timeless due to how amazing the album is. All right, but the album that came in at number 1, because as I said, this is arguably could be their greatest album, I had to go with Painkiller from 1990, 12th studio album, first to feature new drummer Scott Travis from Racer X, who's actually now the longest serving drummer of the band, having been with the band for 34 years. And this is the first album that the band made post their lawsuit, and it just seems to have taken all of that rage, indignation, the outrage, funneling it into the music itself, making for one of the most brutal albums of their career, featuring the hits Painkiller, Nightcrawler, Touch of Evil. But personal favorites of mine for this album, Hell Patrol, Between the Hammer and the Anvil. All of these songs, the album as a whole, being a real game changer at the time, setting the bar very high, where Judas Priest, was one of the only bands that could live up to doing something like this, and kind of understandable why they would try to replicate it 7 years later on Jugulator. But this album, in and of itself, the superior album, and why it's coming in at number 1 for me. And so there you go. There is the Judas Priest album ranking, all 19 studio albums by the band, including their most recent Invincible Shield that just came out on March 8th of 2024. I'll leave a link in the description to the full album review if you want to check that out. And certainly let me know, what is your number 1 Judas Priest album. I'm sure we'll all have a few different ones in this ranking order, as we always do. We all hear things a little differently. All right, everyone, take care, have a good one, and I'll talk to you real soon. Bye-bye.